Globally, Android runs on 68% of all smartphones, but in the United States, Apple holds the majority at 55%. Many of those American buyers pay a steep premium for an iPhone specifically because Apple promises to protect their privacy. That premium begs an uncomfortable question. Does spending $1,000 on a phone actually shield your personal data from advertisers, or does it simply hand your data to a different tech giant? To find out, we can look at a peer-reviewed study out of the University of Oxford. Researchers analyzed the behavior of 24,000 free apps to see exactly what they do behind the scenes. They downloaded 12,000 apps from the Google Play Store and 12,000 from the Apple App Store, capturing the exact state of both ecosystems in 2020, just before Apple introduced its strict opt-in tracking rules in iOS 14.5. They found that third-party tracking and the sharing of personally identifiable information were widespread across both operating systems. Despite the billion-dollar marketing campaigns focused on privacy, apps on both platforms quietly siphoned off user data. When you choose between these two phones, you are not choosing between tracking and privacy. You are choosing between Apple's heavily controlled ecosystem and Google's open tracking model. Either way, data leaves your device. To understand how this works, we need to look at the advertising ID. This is a unique code assigned to your device. It allows completely unrelated apps to recognize you, meaning an advertiser can track your habits whether you are playing a game or checking the weather. On Android, this tracking is nearly universal. The Oxford study found that 86% of Android apps have the ability to access this specific identifier, and the vast majority of this data flows through one specific channel. 87% of these apps use Google Play services for their tracking. Apple takes a stricter approach to this specific ID, limiting ad access to only 42% of iOS apps. But blocking the advertising ID doesn't stop the tracking, it shifts the method. Instead of a single ID, iOS apps rely on alternative frameworks. 70% of iOS apps used Apple's SK ad network, and 54% integrated Google Firebase to monitor users. Apple makes it harder for independent advertisers to build cross-app profiles of you, but both operating systems still allow massive amounts of analytics data to be harvested and sent to tech giants every time you open an app. The two platforms also take completely different approaches to how apps communicate with your phone's physical hardware, like the camera or GPS. Android uses a system called Intents, which allows apps to talk to each other in the background. This means fewer permission pop-ups for the user, but it creates side channels where apps can potentially share your data without you realizing it. Apple uses a heavily encapsulated architecture. Apps are isolated from each other. If an app wants access to your hardware, it has to explicitly ask you for permission first. Because of this strict separation, iOS apps actually request dangerous permissions, like camera or microphone access, far more frequently than their Android counterparts. This chart compares permission requests between the two platforms. We can see that 49% of iOS apps ask for your location data, compared to only 28% of Android apps. Apple's system is transparent. It forces apps to ask you directly. But when half the apps on your phone demand your exact GPS coordinates, the feeling of safety inside a walled garden starts to fade. Developers push so hard to track iOS users because of the stark differences in how the two user bases spend their money. Research shows that the average iPhone user spends $101 a month on technology, roughly double what an Android user spends. This disposable income makes iOS users highly lucrative targets for advertisers. It creates a massive financial incentive for developers to find creative workarounds every time Apple tries to tighten its privacy rules. We can see the real-world results of this financial pressure by looking at how both platforms handle apps designed for an especially vulnerable group, children. The Oxford study revealed that 59% of children's apps on Android share the device's advertising ID over the internet, allowing advertisers to profile kids. On the Apple side, iOS Kids apps ask for location access 7 times more often than their Android equivalents, creating serious risks of GPS exposure. Both platforms have strict rules for family content, and both are subject to laws like COPPA and the GDPR, but third-party tracking routinely bypasses those safeguards. Trusting an app store's Kids label provides a dangerous false sense of security. The data points to a clear conclusion. Neither stock operating system functions as a true shield for your personal data. Here's how you should actually make this decision. You have to choose your ecosystem based on your specific priorities and the trade-offs you are willing to accept. If you take the Android route, you get immense hardware flexibility and lower upfront costs. In exchange, you have to accept that the operating system is built from the ground up to feed Google's advertising business. That lower cost barrier is exactly why Android remains the dominant utility globally, connecting billions of people in emerging markets who are entirely priced out of Apple's ecosystem. If you take the Apple route, you pay a steep premium. In return, you get better default settings and built-in friction against third-party advertisers. But you must accept that Apple and Google will still harvest your analytics in the background. And if you want zero tracking, you cannot rely on either company. Achieving true privacy requires manually auditing your permissions, using VPNs, and installing third-party tools, regardless of which phone you buy. Do not buy a phone based on a marketing promise of privacy. Buy the phone that gives you the utility you need, and take responsibility for protecting your own data.